Cheers and welcome my friends, I'm Horath and we are playing Tyranny as a noble mage. Welcome to another bonus episode. I just want to have a little bit of a chat with Lantry. It seems he has a bunch of stuff to say and it's going to be interesting if you are interested in lore. If not, you can just skip these bonus episodes. It's only talk and no gameplay, so...
At your service.
Yeah, Lantry, got some questions.
I am nothing if not a semi-reliable font of knowledge. What did you want to discuss?
Yeah, let's talk about arcane matters.
And I'd be happy to oblige. Ever since the fall of the Vellum Citadel, it is hard to find someone with whom I can discuss such things.
Okay, let's talk about Kyros' edicts. Kyros has cast many over the ages, and to my knowledge, has never worded two edicts exactly the same. Edicts defy our understanding of magic. Kyros' magic works over vast distances, over indefinite durations, and no Archon or mere Mage can counter the force of an edict. Okay, what can you tell of edicts in general? I explain it to my students like this. A spell is to an edict as a drop of rain is to a hurricane. Edicts and spells are both magical cantrips, but differ in intensity by orders of magnitude. Edicts are almost commands to territories that must be carried out until the instructions allow for the magic to end. If Kyros wants a plague until next Judges' Day, expect copious buboes until next Judges' Day. These are sort of the lumps that the plague creates. That's why it's sometimes called the bubonic plague. Okay. Nothing has ever dispelled an edict, nothing outside of the edict's own sunset clause, as I like to think of them. I'm curious... gonna go into that later. Do edicts work on the same arcane principles as spellcraft and other magic?
Edicts are the strongest manifestation of magic we know, and they seem to violate all other lesser phenomena. No dispel cantrip has ever dented or abated an edict. Even Archons, with powers of great durability, cannot shrug off their effects. Just look at Cairn. Now, what I find curious, edicts can flex a little. Or so my studies suggest this is the case. Take the Edict of Storms. While the day it was proclaimed was the most violent, the actual radius of the storm has changed over time. But most will have none of my hypotheses on this matter.
Okay, fine, I'll take the bait. What's your conjecture about edicts?
So, in my studies, some edicts resolve some problem of the overlords and then vanish into history. But the edicts that linger around, almost all of them begin to widen. Their effects become more intense.
Okay.
Here's the intriguing part. The older the edict, and the more that's written about it, the more the reports of that edict get more dire over time.
That's how legend works. Each generation tells them bigger.
True, I could just be overreacting to sloppy record keeping, but my hunch is that there's some correlation going on here. I contend that edicts are powered by fear. Fear of Kyros helps fuel the casting, and fear of the edict feeds the magic, sustaining it, and if enough people fear it, even growing it a bit.
Okay. That's interesting. So, fear is what feeds the magic of the edict. Maybe that is why Kyros is so powerful now. And the more successful edicts Kyros can pull off, the more Kyros gets feared, I guess. And rule by fear is certainly Kyros' way. Yeah.
Intellectual honesty demands that I study the matter more. If I'm correct, the more people fear and obsess over an edict, the stronger it becomes. Anyway, another study for another time.
Oh crap, I wanted to know what he has to say.
Edicts are the strongest. Now, what I find curious.
Oh crap.
Edicts can
I didn't know I
flex a
couldn't
little,
ask
or
all
so my
the
studies suggest
options.
This is the case. Take the Edict of Storms. While the day it was proclaimed was the most violent, the actual radius of the storm has changed over time.
Yeah, come on, let's talk about a specific one. Any thoughts on the Edict of Execution cast on the Vendrian's Valley? It seems like the Archons were about to kill each other, and the threat of mutual destruction was about all Kyros had left. I imagine fear is the only way to get someone like the voices of Horath to follow orders, and the edict certainly did whip them into action. What do you know of the Edict of Stone? The Edict of Stone ravaged the realm of Azure. The upheaval of earth and rock turned the rolling plains into a craggy steppe known as the Stone Sea. Since the edict was directed at the traitorous Archon of Stone, it would seem the upheaval of Azure was a secondary consequence, though I imagine little of what Kyros does is unintentional. What do you know of the Edict of Fire? I know that you warned us. I'm alive today because of you, as are so many of my brothers and sisters. And I'm most certain you were not ordered to warn us, so all the more reason to honor your decision. Lantry bows deeply, his face blushing when he returns to standing. Given the destruction involved, a warning seemed the humane thing to do. A most noble sentiment. The edict had had its intended effect. It crushed the will of the school and scattered the sages to the wind. I'm glad it brought an end to the conflict, and thanks to your warning, without further loss of life. Can you tell me of the Edict of Storm? The Edict of Storms turned the once forested land of Stalwart into a windswept wasteland. They call it the Blade Grave now, since only the iron and bronze armaments remain. Hurricane breezes, rust winds, and relentless lightning have destroyed the housing and farmlands. Okay, let's speak of something else. I'd be
happy to oblige.
What do you know of...
Since the fall of the Vellum Citadel, it is hard to find someone with whom I can discuss such things.
What do you know of the magic of the Archons? I've studied many of the Archons for many years. Compared to the other sages, I'm an expert on that subject. Which is sad, because I feel like I've still so much to learn. Okay, how does the magic of the Archons work? The Archons all have magical powers that are intuitive. When the voices of Horath pulls out someone's mind, or Graven Ash protects his soldiers, that magic isn't a signed spell or ritual. To them it's closer to flexing one's hand. Archons are, what's the word for it? Axiom of magic? The root of all magic? Spell pioneers? I'm sure this analogy is off in many ways, but I see Archons as the mothers of original magic, and everyone else is just imitating them. Okay, let's have a look. While every guild or school of magic will ascribe a different name to the theory, all mages inevitably stumble upon an inescapable fact. Only the Archons can will magic into being. Everyone else can only cast magic by invoking the sigil of an Archon that has come before. None know how the Archons do their magic. It seems to be different with each Archon. But theory suggests that once an Archon starts to invoke their powers, anyone else who comes after that Archon could, with the proper knowledge, tap into that power with the proper sigil and know-how. This observed law has given rise to a common question from young students. Could one guess at a sigil of an Archon not yet born, or not remembered by history, or simply unknown to the caster, and successfully cast a spell? Experienced mystics could tell you this is impossible, for they know that it's not enough to just mimic the gestures of a sigil. One must have willful, conscious knowledge of the Archon and the intended power being channeled. Right. That is somewhat the current state of what constitutes an action in philosophy. A willful intended act. So I guess it would have been weird if you could just do magic sort of incidentally, which would be the other thing. Kind of like the idea how magic works, because if that didn't, then you could just involuntarily do some crazy magic stuff without even wanting to do it. That would make mean a lot of chaos. To confuse things a bit, some Archons learn to cast other spells in the same fashion as us lesser mages. If you are as important as an Archon, you learn quick that all knowledge is power. I've studied many of the Archons for many years. Compared to the other sages, I'm an expert on the subject. Alright, are all Archons loyal to Kyros? Officially, yes. In actuality, no. Those with the true gift for magic always come to the attention of Kyros. A few manage to evade attention for a bit. The School of Tides was founded by one such uncontrollable, but these are history's exceptions. Occulted Jade, Archon of Tides, never bowed to Tyros, and it's said she survived the assassins sent to silence her. It makes her flight from Kyros before the war all the more troubling. We knew her as the symbol of strength, but when threatened, her weaker nature won. Let's just say that maybe she just retreated a little bit, like the ebb, and maybe she'll come back, like the tide. When we write biographies of the Archons, we often refer to them as exarchs, in their formative years before stepping into their prime. But officially, Kyros is supposed to grant all titles of Archon. It's quite the faux pas to self-appellate. Exactly why Jade insisted on calling herself Archon of Tides. She didn't need Kyros' approval to wear the title she deserves, and I know she loved the fact that doing so must have annoyed Kyros. I've studied many of the Archons. Oh yeah, okay, we read that already. How is an Archon born or bred? That really interests me. I think we all dream of one day waking up and being an Archon. Given some of the madmen and loons that have exhibited mystical greatness, it can seem unfair that the rest of us can't do it. I can say with confidence, Archons aren't born, they become. Gravenash is a good study of this. Before he was the Archon of War, he was a successful commander, each victory more daring and glorious than the next. Somewhere along the way, his leadership took on mystical qualities. The Gravenash we know today can reach out and protect his soldiers from harm, but maybe at first he could just protect those near him. I wouldn't know for certain, but all will attest that he didn't have this power his whole life. I've studied... yeah, okay. So that is about... is it about Archons? I wonder if it would be possible for us to become an Archon.
And I'd be happy to oblige. Ever since the fall of the Vellum Citadel, it is hard to find someone with whom I can discuss such things.
Okay, what do you know of spellcraft?
I've forgotten more than most blood chanters have ever learned. What do you want to know?
Can you teach me anything?
I think you know all I can teach you.
Shame. What sort of magic did the sages teach you? Sage Sindin tutored me in the traditional sigils, those of preservation, concealment and healing, as derived by the bygone Archons of Teravis, Fading Wrath and the Orphan Midwife. Yeah, I think we know... Do we know preservation? I think we got illusion. I'm not sure we know preservation. The preservation magic is largely functional. Sealing parchment, binding books, that sort of thing. Ah, okay. All of us chroniclers learn concealment magic, as our ideal method would be to study events without contaminating the decisions being made. As for the healing magic, most of us modern sages study this a great deal. The school has a shoddy reputation among the common folk. I figure if they knew us as healers and caregivers, maybe we start to change opinions. Healing. Now that's a noble craft to study. True, but given how accident-prone it can be, I think the person that benefits most from my magic is me. But certainly, the most gratifying spells I know are the ones that ease pain and suffering. They can make me feel slightly useful. I want to know about the others as well. As for the healing magic, many of us modern sages study this a great deal. The school has a shoddy reputation among the common folk. I figure if they knew us as healers and caregivers, maybe we start to change opinions. Crap. So I gotta be on my guard. I cannot always take all the options. What can you tell me about signing magic? Scholars don't have a good word for what Archons do when they cast magic. Couldn't tell you how Gravenash casts his protection over his soldiers. Nor would I know how Bled and Mark consciously decides to move through a shadow. That is the executioner of Kyros, a knife in the shadows, and always alone. We already know about him. But when us mere mages want to cast a spell, we do so by signing the sigil of an Archon that previously discovered the magical phenomenon in question. It's debated whether Archons create new magic or just discover magic that was waiting for us, but such questions seem impossible to answer while sober. Come on, tell me about what you did. No, I don't get that option anymore. Crap. Okay, that's... No, wait, that's not all. I gained the Wheel of Ages, though. I gained a reputation ability with him. That's nice.
One moment, my friend. Just let me finish this thought.
Ending his note with a flourish, Lantry licks the tip of the quill, pausing to taste it a second and third time, before tucking the pen in a holster on his sleeve. So what's on your mind? Did you want to discuss matters of the present, or would you prefer more scholarly rant? I have some questions.
I am nothing if not a semi-reliable font of knowledge. What did you want to discuss?
Yeah, tell me something about you. Me? Well, fine, but I'm not a very fascinating subject. I study interesting people, enough to know I'm not one of them. Interesting, so he has a lot more to say than prior to this. What's your story? Tell me the origins of Lantry. Someday, someone half your age will ask you to sum up your life and you realize what an odious request that is. Well, where to start? I grew up in Sunder. I was born right after independence from the realm of Stalwart, so yeah, do the math and you'll realize I'm old. My parents were harbour hands. My mother never returned from a voyage and my father lost his hand to infection and decided to send me to the School of Ink and Quills. In a treaty that ended with the firm stipulation that Sunder chose to leave and that Stalwart did not lose a civil war, the free city of Sunder marks 347 TR as its year of independence. It's pretty spry for 84. So when they sold you, how much were you worth? 3 bronze rings, or so I remember it. Not that the sum is burned into my mind or anything. As a novice, I was assigned to the Dovecotes, where I learned how to raise and groom birds to carry missives. And most of my early tomes are on that subject. 10 years and several tomes later, someone decided I was ready to be welcome into the inner circle and shown the ways of magic. And since then, I've spent a great deal of time in field study, which I suppose readied me for life after the fall of the Vellum Citadel. Well, as much as anything could ready one for the strangeness of these days. Were you born Lantry, or did you take that name on joining the School of Ink? Why couldn't we ask all that prior to that? I already did a bonus episode with him, but I hardly had any options that I could talk about with him. Maybe he just opened up now. How's our loyalty and fear with him? Oh, loyalty 4. I'm nearly there to tier 5. Were you born Lantry, or did you take that name? Most sages take a new name when they join the school, but for me the transition was difficult at first. I stuck to my old commoner name, and then just never got around to picking some highfalutin name like Sage Apophysis or Sage Dangling Participle. Is this your true skein? Did you always want to be a sage? I cannot imagine doing anything different. I suppose in my youngest days I yearned for battle and glory like most boys I knew. Having now seen how short a soldier's life can be, I look back on that old calling, that old mindset, and laugh. So, what's your story? What do you mean by that? I know you're smarter than you act. Extend me the same courtesy. Lantry strokes his beard, leaving flecks of sepia among his white whiskers. I was on the take from the voices of Horath, or at least an agent of his sent me to the School of Ink and Quill 30 years ago. It'd be years later until I made the connection to the Archon. Okay, he was a spy. Most people think the war began 3 years ago, but the voices of Horath had his hands in things sooner than that. I was part of that early invasion, an eager kid, happy to accept a 30-year assignment that comes with an education. So advocating surrender to Kyros was the end of your long plan? I'm dreadfully unamused by this. Yes and no. When I first left, I was just happy to be getting educated by the sages on someone else's rings, and my orders were simply to listen and report. As the time drew near, my commands were to win them over, a little at a time, to the notion of surrender. But I failed. The elders of the school grew defiant, and the militant minds won out. These are tearsmen after all. I didn't deliver this surrender, and it took the Overlord's edict to end what I was sent to do. What else are you not telling me? You read the Edict of Fire. You were the messenger of Kyros' judgment on my work. It was about then that I decided I'd need to take an interest in your skein. In truth, I'm deeply curious about any who have lived as vassals to Kyros' most supreme magic. When I heard you were proclaiming a second edict, I had to find a way for us to meet. Being tied up in a prisoner camp was not the intended plan. Dude, you're a little creepy, I gotta say. Thank you for telling me. No more secrets, understood. I will endeavor to earn your trust as best I can. Sorry to have given you reason for doubt. Okay, let's speak of something else. Me? Okay. You mentioned raising birds earlier. Think you'll go back to doing that. At some point, yes. Good birds are needed to keep the missives moving through the tiers. I set all my best birds to flight before the edict. Turn of phrase, constant call, and the rest. They're out there somewhere, and maybe when this is over, I'll summon them back and start a new dovecote. How do you feel about Kyros? I've seen what tiny despots, merchant cabals, and mage guilds can inflict in the names of all sorts of righteous causes. I will take the rule of Kyros over the tyranny of every idiot on Territus. Let's speak of something else.
Nothing if not a semi-reliable font of knowledge. What did you want to discuss?
Yeah, tell me about our allies and enemies.
Well, you might want to ask a more soldierly type about the armies, but do you want to talk about the Archons or other mages?
Let's talk about the Archons. I know much of such luminaries, so I'm careful with my words, but ask if you must. Tell me about Graven Ash, Archon of War.
Ash has served with Kyros for a mere century, but he has been a reliable general and level-headed warlord. Certainly when compared to some of the more bloodthirsty Archons to serve under Kyros. I'm not saying the disfavored are merciful. I'm just saying I've read the stories of the Archon of Blood and know it could be worse. I know Graven Ash can defend his soldiers from far away. Ash's Aegis is the term us Arconophiles have taken to calling it. Not surprisingly, Graven Ash is beloved by his troops. I mean, if Tunon could mystically protect you from cudgels and sharp sticks from leagues away, you'd like him more.
I guess so. Okay, tell me about the Voices of Nerat. The Voices of Nerat is one of Kyros' most dangerous and unpredictable servants. He can pull memories, whole personalities, if you believe some reports, from his victims, and over time, this has created a single Archon with the knowledge of countless lifetimes. He and I were in written contact as part of the taking of the Vellum Citadel. Though I exchanged very few words with him, it was readily apparent that the Voices of Nerat doesn't see people, he sees uses. Okay, what about Tunon? First, I suppose I should ask, what do you know about him? Fatebinders do not discuss matters to outsiders. Of course you don't. Apologies for implying otherwise. Tunon, Archon of Justice, exists in text spanning back hundreds of years. I can say I know how he came to be the Overlord's adjudicator. Maybe you know that one, but he oversaw the conquest of the Tundra sovereigns, and they bowed to Kyros in the year 83, so Tunon must be really old. What do we have now? 428, I guess? 431? Holy crap, that guy is ancient. Okay. Yeah, what about Bled and Mark, Archon of Shadows? Very little. His name is not printed in many texts. I know that he is sworn to Tunon and acts as his assassin. I know he goes back a long ways though. I've long assumed he served Kyros about as long as Tunon, give or take. I'm pretty sure that we are getting some sort of foreshadowing. We might actually have to confront this Bled and Mark guy at some point, I guess. If he is shoved in our faces like that. I mean, not shoved in our faces, but he's cropping up fairly regularly in these talks. Okay, what of Siren, Archon of Song?
Not the youngest Archon in history, but certainly one of the younger, and history has yet to write much about her. And if I happen to be the first to write about her, well, that will look nice for my legacy.
Okay, what about Kern, Archon of Stone? Of him, I know very little. I believe he was the wild man of the hills that Graven Ash subdued in 402. But only one source suggests that link. He was famous for being, well, a big sour jerk. Seems he let his mouth run off about Kyros, and that was the end of his story. Okay, let's speak of something else. What is there to talk about? Some more questions.
Nothing if not a semi-reliable font of knowledge. What did you want to discuss?
Okay, what can you tell me of the School of Ink and Quill?
You mean what's left of them? What would you like to know?
What's the core philosophy of the School of Ink and Quill?
The sages are archivists, academicians, and arcanists. Our mission is to preserve the knowledge of today for the good of tomorrow. Though we are known for our magic, few realize that most sages concern themselves with scribal work. Only a select few have the talent or focus to work the sigils. Each sage benefited from the scrolls of learning that came before him, and so each sage must repay this boon by gathering, authoring, or translating new texts to the stacks. But all that's a bit generous. It's no secret that the sages were far more happy to add knowledge than to share it.
Okay. Why did the sages resist Kyros?
Why, indeed. As historians, it is our place to document, not direct. Let others rage and resist. Ours is the duty to record. The decision to defy Kyros was not unanimous, nor one decided upon lightly.
Man, the voices of Horath must have a really long way of thinking ahead. We read somewhere or heard somewhere that he thinks 1,000 steps ahead. But if he actually had the good sense to recruit a tiersman 30 years ago and send them to them to become a sage, that's pretty amazing.
The laws of Kyros would forbid much of the knowledge contained in the Vellum Citadel. The elder sages feared, rightly perhaps, that the Overlord would put an end to our tradition of stockpiling knowledge. The Battle of the Vellum Citadel was a battle to preserve knowledge, but our actions will be remembered as treason against the will of Kyros.
Tell me a bit about the school's history.
The sages trace their days to a generation after 5 wives, when the first settlers moved west. The Vellum Citadel began as a scholastic retreat, slowly blossoming into the finest library in the continent across the generations.
We've already read that in the talk with Ebb in the bonus episode. These were sort of the mythical first settlers of the tiers.
The centuries fly by, and suddenly, the Vellum Citadel is the definitive archive in the tiers. The sages branched out into carrying missives for wealthy clients, training noble children to read. The peasants may have feared us, but we remained useful enough to the kings and queens of the tiers to avoid war. When Kyros came to the tiers, that's when our hubris came back to haunt us. The elder sages, the other elder sages, not I, believed our spellcraft was enough to ward off any siege. Well, we know how that turned out.
They must have known about the edicts beforehand, though. No? What sort of sigils do the sages practice?
Traditionally, we use magic only so that we may observe and archive. So that means magic of concealment and protection. But, in truth, we have amassed a great wealth of knowledge. Before the Vellum Citadel fell, any given subject of magic had at least one sage practicing it.
So you're admitting you had at least one agent of yours studying the magic of the Tidecasters?
Well, I mean, if such information had fallen into our hands generations ago, we'd be fools not to...
Not to suckle off that ill-gotten teat of knowledge? Filthy word whores of the worst degree. The Edict of Fire wasn't half of what you deserved.
Word whores. Oh, that is hilarious. I can see this conversation going to very constructive places. Both of you drop it.
What would you like to know?
Okay, let's speak of something else.
I am nothing if not a semi-reliable font of knowledge. What did you want to discuss?
Okay, so they say sages know all sorts of things.
I know everything, except for who's been saying that. What's on your mind?
Can you teach me something about history?
I'm flattered you think me that wise, but unless you are enthralled by migration observations and titillated by triangle ratios, I think I'd bore you silly.
But what better tangent than triangles?
Fine, fine. If you have truly nothing better to do than talk trivia with old Lantry, so be it.
Lantry pops open a scroll case by his hip, producing a long, handwritten manuscript.
A Brief History of the Tears by Sage Lantry. Volume 1, Settlers from the East. Dry land! Came the cry from the prow of the ship. After months in the deep ocean, the pioneers of the Tears saw their promised land at long last.
A book that starts with brief, that has the brief prefix. I've never encountered one that was actually brief. The minutes roll on, and Lantry cheerfully reads through his painstaking treatise. Yeah, fascinating. Listen politely.
Volume 3, years 90 to 94. If you thought 88 was a crazy time when everything changed, wait until 91.
Haunting memories of Tunon's lectures creep into your mind. Really, do go on.
Well, if you enjoyed that, you're going to love Ratios of the Sun. So, by using the shadow of a staff at noon as a starting point, I used triangles to show a relation.
Unlike Tunon, Lantry cannot kill you for walking out of a lecture. And unlike Tunon, Lantry has to eventually sleep. You've experienced worse. Man, that is some great writing here. But were your two measurements far enough to derive a parallax?
Ah, I knew someone would ask that. Yes. So here's my proof. Sage winding script shows a relationship between all half-square triangles. I have a diagram somewhere.
From time to time the wind picks up. The howling, biting freeze offers a momentary respite from the deluge of blather. So if that's correct, you could estimate almost any length from a known angle. Which you can actually do.
Yes. Way to steal the concluding reveal from me. But yeah, that's about the gist of it.
Yeah, he almost sounds disappointed that he couldn't bore us further.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I think my voice needs rest. Thank you for the rousing conversation.
Yes, yes, yes. Hilarious.
One moment, my friend.
Yeah. Okay, got some questions.
Nothing, if not I know everything.
Tell me about the Bane.
Saying that. What's on your mind?
A shame Sage Cloven Claws was reduced to a pile of ash. Man knew all that's been written on the subject. Most of what we know is summed up in the name. The full term for them is Mage Bane, and there's a good reason for it. They'll prey on anything that moves, but they'll show favoritism towards magically active humans. Okay, I guess we're going to encounter these beasts. Tell me about wisps. Wisps are largely inconsequential by themselves. Hardly the menace most associated with the Bane, but these glowing little creatures often follow in the wake of scourges or other larger Bane, and that can make them a real danger. What do you know of the scourges? Writhing masses of sharpened limbs, and quiet as a shadow. Scourges are the most frequently observed type of Bane. Not sure if they're the most numerous or just the most likely to attack. What can you tell me of the Havocs? Havocs are notable for being territorial. By all accounts, they stick to a chosen location and lurk and lurk. If you see one, common wisdom is to run. It'll give up chase, eventually, when you find the edge of its home. You know anything about the Malices? Most troublesome of the Mage Bane are the Malices. Though I've never experienced it, I'm told a Malice can take hold of your waking self, leave you trapped in a dream while it puppets you. If evidence of these creatures didn't predate Kyros, I think the Overlord the only creature powerful and cruel enough to breed the Malice. Do you know where these creatures come from? They seem to breed in the old walls, or at least that is where they exist in the highest concentration. But there seems to be no social interaction amongst the Bane, and no logical mechanism of grinding their privates to make little Banes. Interesting. Let's speak of something else.
I know everything, except for who's been saying that. What's on your mind?
Know anything about the beastmen?
My knowledge is largely academic, not to be mistaken for practical.
You know of their origins.
The earliest settlers made note of the beastmen, so they were here before us. but not before the older realms. By all accounts, the tribes do not have record of a time before the old walls. So, the logical conclusion is that they arrived after the old realms, but before Five Wives.
Okay, so they are sort of the indigenous population of this place, I guess. What of the tribes?
There have been thousands of tribes throughout history. Most dissolve within a Acquireman's lifespan. The stronger females branch off and make their own tribes with tougher names. Then the King of Azure rounds you up and puts you to work. The Stone Stalkers are the most powerful of remaining tribes, thriving now that Azure has fallen. As for the rest, the old Talons of Frozen Cloud, the Trollhooks, the Kolakar, the Katvanas, the Jaw Snap, all gone, I think. And then there's the Shadowhunters. They're all but extinct.
What do you know of their minds and mannerisms?
They are true to their names and live like beasts. Clothing and artifice seem to have little value to them, whereas rutting and killing are the reason they wake in the morning. But it would be a mistake to think them stupid. Ask any tamer and they'll tell you some stories of their cunning. The beasts are wanting in patience and diplomacy, but they are a clever bunch.
Where do their loyalties rest?
You'd want to ask the authority, Sage Quillborn. She lived with the Kolakar for a few span back in 404. Some truly fascinating findings. She noted that every successful tribe has a singular female leader. It's Prima. She noted that beastmen show fluid loyalty to new matrons. They adapt well to changing leaders, but they never change the relatively simple but strict hierarchical model. Few beastmen have accepted fealty to Kyros. It would seem the notion of bowing to a person you have not seen in the flesh is insanity. This inability to bow to the Overlord will no doubt doom the species, for Kyros does not suffer such token insults.
Right. Let's speak of something else.
I know everything, except for who's been saying that.
Okay,
What's on your mind?
that's all for now. Let's discuss current matters. Would you prefer more scholarly rant?
Of course. How can I help?
Know anything about the region we're in?
The spires predate us all. As far as I know, we're the only ones who've been up here since... ever? I think this might be a first. Perhaps the real Trailblazer had trouble getting down and was lost to history. Of course. How can I help?
Okay. What are your thoughts on our traveling associates?
Are you asking for an objective assessment? Or is this your way of saying you want to gossip?
Barrick, what do you make of him?
He is a proper Northman, with duty in his blood. Which makes me suspect his loyalty to Ash is stronger than his loyalty to you. As long as your interests remain aligned to Graven Ash, this shouldn't be an issue. I must admit, I am completely fascinated by his predicament. Ever tried diagramming the articulations of his armor? Don't. It'll only lead to madness and ruination.
Okay. Thoughts on verse?
I know little of swordplay, and couldn't work a curve and arrow to save my life. I can't really comment on the lady.
Coward.
Lady, you're just afraid to talk in front of me, clear as day. Your sweat is easier to read than your ink scribbles.
Yeah, I agree.
No, not at all. I just don't know how to comment on a warrior's worth, that's all.
Spare me your blather.
Verse pauses to read Lantry's body language.
Huh. Think that, do you? Didn't know you had such swollen hope for me.
Explain yourself.
Just calling it as I see it. And I see he's holding back. Nothing serious, just a bit insulting.
No need to keep secrets, Lantry.
A most fascinating specimen. I think she has great potential. A dangerous amount of potential, to be blunt. The Scarlet Furies are the fighting elite of the Scarlet Chorus, and that means floating to the top of a sea of blood and chum. We should consider ourselves lucky to have her on our side, with her weapons usually pointed away from us.
Yeah, I guess so. What do you make of Ebb?
Good tidecasters stay underwater. Kyros did the Tears a favor by erasing those moon howlers from history. A shame one of them escaped justice.
I like that I make you this agitated. Considering all the things that don't seem to bother you in the slightest. I'm not gonna lie. I'm kind of getting off on how much power you're giving me here.
I have to say, I like her sass.
Ugh. And then there's your coquettish act whenever someone calls you on your teeth. I'll be the one ready to tangle when, not if, you decide to pounce.
Okay. They really don't trust each other. Yeah, I think we're through talking with Lantry, so that has been a very lengthy bonus episode. If I actually manage to make it all the way through, let's say our code phrase is dove, like the bird. So if you want to put that in the comments, I'll know that you actually managed to watch 40 minutes of this. In any case, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like. If you didn't, tell me why in the comments so I can improve. And if you want to see more of this series in the future, please consider subscribing and meet me in one of the regular Let's Play episodes. Thanks, and bye-bye.